Hey guys, welcome to US History Lesson number 10, Understanding Propaganda in World War II, Creating Your Own Work of Art. Today we're going to be discussing propaganda from the Second World War and different techniques that propagandists, that is to say people who make propaganda, use in order to be effective at it. Here you see two classic examples of World War II propaganda in the form of Captain America comic books. We'll return a little bit to Captain America later, but the whole point and purpose of Captain America as a comic book is to convince children how great and powerful the United States is. As always, I like to go over the order of things. First up, we're going to go over the learning targets that this assignment hits. Then, we're going to explain what you're expected to be able to do by the end of this assignment. We're going to cover key vocabulary necessary to understand the assignment, and we're going to walk through the assignment, post it in Empower, and show and explain past student work as examples so that you understand what's expected to earn a 3.0. The target that's hit here, that you can earn a 3.0 or above on, is this. HS1. Analyze a variety of historical sources and data of qualitative and quantitative nature. This is the exact same learning target as the previous assignment. It asks you to explain how point of view, audience, format, authorship, purpose, context, and limits, including bias, influences a document's content. We're also going to tag on a second learning target here. This way, for this learning target, you only have two more assignments to do because this one counts as the third. And that's for HE1, which is Historical Expressions 1. Describe and analyze the historical development and impact of the arts and literature on the culture of the United States. So basically, through this lesson, you're going to create your own historical source. And so for that reason, you're able to analyze it, explain its point of view, its purpose, and explain those things hitting the first HS1 target. And because you're technically creating a piece of art, you're also able to explain how it would fit into the culture or context of US history, which allows you to hit HE1, describing and analyzing how art shapes history. This is a double whammy, and so this is a really benefit for you guys to finish. So we have some goals for this assignment. First up, learners will be able to understand propaganda techniques and the purpose of propaganda. This is where this presentation is really useful. We talk about the types of propaganda that you're going to need in order to complete your project. Next, learners will be able to apply their understanding of propaganda and propaganda techniques to create their own World War II themed propaganda piece. And there's actually a whole bunch of freedom here. When I show you some student examples, you'll see just how much freedom you have when you do this. And then last but not least, learners will be able to break down and explain the message of the propaganda that you created and explain what techniques that you used in order to get this message across. So, before digging into the project and its requirements, let's dig into some important ideas and background information. There are 5 key ideas that I feel you need to know in order to understand and complete this assignment. First up, propaganda. We've been throwing this word around. Let's talk about what it is in very specific terms. Next, we're going to talk about appeals to fear. Then we're going to talk about the use of plain folk, bandwagon effect, and we're going to finish up with name calling. These last 4, that is to say appeals to fear, use of plain folk, bandwagon effect, and name calling, are all sort of propaganda techniques. It's ways that a propagandist, somebody who makes propaganda, can ultimately try to sway a viewer or reader that their point of view is correct. So we're going to talk about these and give some examples, both from World War II and from, well, something we all love, Star Wars. All right, so propaganda. Propaganda is an exaggerated message, usually visual in form, like a cartoon or a poster, but not always. A speech can be propaganda, a book can be propaganda, but most commonly it ends up being something visual like a cartoon or poster. And so this thing seeks to convince the viewer to think a certain way about something. It's basically trying to persuade you to act or think a certain way. Okay, so here we come back to Captain America. Perfect example of World War II propaganda. In this case, the propaganda targets children because children are easy to convince of things, right? They're impressionable. And so children are given this comic book about Captain America, who's this great American hero who stands for truth, justice, the American way, and stands against America's enemies, the evil Adolf Hitler, Red Skull, who really sort of represents the idea of fascism, which is, of course, out of World War II. And children grow up believing that the United States is this great, powerful, strong country that defends others. And it's no coincidence that Captain America's weapon of choice is a shield. It's the idea that he is a protector, because that's exactly what a shield does, is it protects you. The second example is one that you may not realize you're familiar with, but this is actually Dr. Seuss. And once you start to look at the cartoon characters and the way they're drawn, it's unmistakable that this is Dr. Seuss. And so this cartoon by Dr. Seuss is a piece of propaganda that tries to convince Americans to get involved in World War II because at first we were staying neutral. We didn't want to be involved. This is kind of a dark, messed up cartoon. If you read along the top, it says, "And the wolf chewed up the children and spit out their bones. But those were foreign children, and it didn't really matter." And you can see that the woman who's reading this story, Adolf the Wolf, and you assume that that is a line from Adolf the Wolf, has a shirt that says America First. The idea is that when the United States is neutral, we are putting ourselves first before everybody else. Instead of helping others, we're being selfish. And so she's reading these children and terrifying them about Adolf the Wolf, of course representing Adolf Hitler. And Dr. Seuss is trying to show how foolish it is that we're not getting involved. This idea that nobody wants children to die, nobody wants children to be chewed up and have their bones spit out. And since nobody wants that, why are we okay with this happening to foreign children, right? We should get involved and stop this because this is terrible. These are just two examples of propaganda from the Second World War. Okay, so the first propaganda technique that we're going to talk about here is appeals to fear. I apologize for the length of this slide, but I want to be crystal clear in what this looks like. Again, we'll follow it up with two examples, one from World War II and one from Star Wars, to give you an example of this. So an appeal to fear basically creates an uncomfortable or unwanted situation. Propagandists, that is to say those who create propaganda, are able to catch the attention of people and better convince them of their position. By creating an unwanted or feared situation, propagandists are able to tell you ways to avoid that situation, right? If you don't want this to happen, you should do this. If you don't want that to happen, you should do that. By using people's fears, propaganda catches attention and manipulates people into doing what they, the propagandists, wants them to do by convincing them that that thing, right, the thing that they want you to do, helps you avoid this terrible situation. So here's the first example from Star Wars, and it says, "The terrorists are coming for your world next." And so this is from the point of view of the Empire, because you can see that the rebel ships there, the X-Wings, are viewed as the enemy. And so really what the Empire is trying to do here is make worlds afraid of the resistance. And if you can make worlds afraid of the resistance, they won't join the resistance. And that's what the Empire wants, right? They want a weak, small, scattered resistance, not a unified, strong, multi-planet resistance. And so this is an appeal to fear, right? That you should be afraid of the rebels and that they're going to come for you next. And so by appealing to fear, what the propagandist is trying to get you to do is not join the rebellion. And so that's sort of how they appeal to you. Here's one from World War II, and this one is sort of a weird one. Students have struggled with this one in the past, which is why I decided to talk about it. So it says, "Go ahead, please take day off." This is obviously a racist depiction of a Japanese person, right? You can tell by the red sun on their hat, which represents Japan, and the exaggerated sort of racist features, including the mustache, the slanted eyes, the big glasses, sort of the pig nose. These are the traditional racist ways that Japanese are drawn during this time. But students misunderstand the message here. So this Japanese person, who obviously is our enemy during World War II, says, "Go ahead, please take day off." You can see that he's sort of rubbing his hands together like he's happy or excited about this, like he has an evil plan, right? An evil genius sort of rubs their hands together. And so he's happy that you're taking a day off. And the fear here is that you don't want to help the enemy. If you take a day off, you're helping the enemy because that's one less plane that gets made, that's, one less gun that gets built. And so when you take a day off, the enemy is happy. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants to help America's enemies. And so by sort of convincing you or making you uncomfortable by this idea that you're helping our enemy, the poster convinces you not to take days off, right? If you take days off, that makes the enemy happy, so you shouldn't take days off. And that's sort of the message here, and they appeal to that uncomfortable situation of helping the enemy. Okay, so the next propaganda technique we're going to talk about here is the use of plain folk. Okay? When trying to send an effective message and convince people to think or act a certain way, it's important that people can identify with the message. By showing or quoting a regular person, propagandists, again, those who make propaganda, are able to better relate their message to their audience. While a famous person might catch attention, it's hard to identify with their lifestyle. When people identify with the message, they are more likely to be convinced of it or buy it. So let's take a look at an example. Again, here's a Star Wars example. I'm going to go ahead and read it before we talk about it. So at the top, it says, will he ever know freedom? Right? And you have this child here. And at the bottom, right now, for him, freedom is just a story, a near forgotten memory, whispered at night to help him sleep. Soon, though, freedom's wind will again sweep through the galaxy. Once again will the Jedi rise, and what was make-believe will once again become reality. And so the idea here is that, most people have children. And so you're creating a plain folk situation where everybody identifies with having a child or caring for their child. And so this idea of, hey, will your child ever know what it's like to be free? Will freedom just be this story that your child is told, like, hey, in the good old days, we were free. Now we're under control of the empire. And so by tapping into this feeling that all parents have to protect their children, this is a plain folk message that appeals to them. They see their child in the child that illustrated here. Okay. Here's another example, very similar to the last one, except this one is actually from World War II. And it says, keep these hands off. And you can see the two shadowy, clawed, evil-looking hands. One is, of course, Japan in the bottom left-hand corner there. The rising sun is a Japanese symbol, and in the upper right, you can see the swastika representing Nazi Germany. You can see that the real message here, what the propagandist is trying to convince you to do, is very clearly written at the bottom. Buy the new victory bonds. Right? A victory bond is when people would give the government money to help fight the war, and then in exchange, they would be paid back later with extra money. So let's say I bought a victory bond now for $20, helped the government fight the war. In 25 years, it might be worth $40. So I double my money. I just have to wait for it because I'm basically giving the government a loan to help them when they need it. So the plain folk message here is, most people identify with a woman and child, right? That could be my wife and my daughter, or that could be my sister and her daughter. It could be my niece and her daughter. And so I feel this connection to this poster that I want to go out and buy victory bonds to protect that woman and child in my life. So by using an average person, they're tapping into that desire to help and protect them. All right, the next one is called the bandwagon effect. Everyone wants to feel part of something larger than themselves. The power of peer pressure can convince people to think or act certain ways. Some propagandists try to take advantage of this social pressure and try to manipulate people into doing something because, quote, everyone else is doing it. By making the ideas or actions seem common or popular, they can make an idea or action cool and look more attractive. So here's one example, right? Resist the empire, join the alliance today. And so what you can see here is everybody is doing it, right? You have Han Solo, you have Luke Skywalker, you have Princess Leia. Everybody is doing this, and if you don't do it, you're going to be left behind, and you're going to be the loser who doesn't get involved in the resistance. And so it's sort of that peer pressure kind of concept. Here's another one from World War II this time. Come on, gang, we're building arms for victory. It's this idea that, hey, you should go get a job at an ammunition factory or a weapons factory because everybody's doing it, right? Come on, gang. This idea of everybody, all my friends, everybody around you is doing this thing. And if you don't do it, you're just going to be left out. You're not cool. Next up, this is our last one. It's name calling. So sometimes the best way to get people to agree with you is to tap into their hatred and mistrust of others. Propagandists can point the finger at who is to blame in order to gain support for things. By appealing to stereotypes about certain groups of people or even a specific person, propagandists can gain support for their ideas. If you know that everybody hates or dislikes this particular group, and you can make something about that group and why they should be hated, that's going to be a popular message. So let's take a look here. Here's an example from Star Wars. Do you think they want peace? Again, they is going to refer to the resistance here because you can see the three X-Wing resistant ships. And it says rebels are terrorists. And that's the name calling, right? They're literally saying that rebels are the enemy. Rebels can't be trusted. They cause terror. They cause destruction. And so the way that the Empire is gaining support for this message is by making people hate or mistrust the rebels. Okay. Here's an example from World War II. In this case, you can see the face of Adolf Hitler in the background in the flames amongst the rubble of a destroyed city with, thousands of dead people in the background. And of course, you have this child, and if you start to look closely at the details, he's sitting in a pool of blood. And he's sitting there crying because his mother has been stabbed and she's dead and he's alone in the world. And so it's the idea that, hey, this guy is pure evil. He is the enemy. Don't forget that Adolf Hitler is, the source of all evil in the world. He destroys your towns. He destroys your people. He makes, motherless children. This guy is evil. And so by pointing the finger at him, you're able to unify people to fight the war, right? This is why we're fighting the war, because of this guy. And so that's another way that propagandists can do this. Okay, so here's some directions and steps for completion. At this stage, we actually have quite a bit of switching to do with this one. We're going to switch to the assignment sheet, which I'm going to pull up my Word version, but your version will be a PDF in Empower. They're identical, but they might look just slightly different. Okay, we'll start by going over the directions and the steps for the assignment. Next, we'll take a look at the rubric and clarify what a 3, a 3.5, and a 4.0 look like. And then finally, we'll come back to this presentation and we'll look at some examples of students from the past years. And really, these go back about 7 years to my first year teaching, because that's how long I've been doing this assignment. All right, so we're going to go ahead and exit out of here for now. We are going to come back to this. And I said we'd start here with the assignment sheet. This assignment sheet should look similar to the ones that you did for the first 2 projects. And so it should feel pretty straightforward. So the purpose of this assignment. Students will select and research a topic related to World War II and express a point of view or opinion of your choosing using a visual representation or visual elements. Basically, students are going to create their own historical source and you're going to explain it. This is how we're hitting those 2 learning targets, right? Analyzing sources and understanding how art impacts culture of the United States. So, individual or partners. This project is individual only. You're all in different places. You're probably doing this and nobody else in the room is working on it, right? Somebody's behind you, somebody's ahead of you, and so that's really the biggest reason this needs to be on your own. Okay, so the required size. Pay close attention here. You're going to need to provide your own paper or poster for this project, and I'm pretty flexible on what you use. My only rule is this. Your propaganda piece must be on paper no smaller than 8.5 by 11. 8.5 by 11 is basically a standard sheet of computer paper or notebook paper. It can't be any smaller than that. So it has to be at least that big or bigger. And I always encourage larger. I've had students do ones that are multiple feet by multiple feet, like 2 or 3 feet by 2 or 3 feet. I don't demand that because that's a lot of extra work, but this is totally up to you and your artistic license. What do you feel you want to work with? Okay? It is preferred that the paper be blank with no lines, but you got what you got. If you don't have blank computer paper laying at home and all you have is line paper, we'll make it work. It's not ideal, but I also understand that this year has some special challenges. Okay, so examples are posted in Empower. Technically, they're not there. They're going to be at the end of this video. Okay? Other expectations. Your propaganda piece should contain meaningful coloring. What I mean by that is pencil gray and white is just not going to do it. It's totally cool if you want to do black and white, right? But it should be meaningful. What do you color black and why are you coloring it black? What do you leave white and why are you leaving it white? An excellent example of this is really using black, white, and red because those are the colors on the Nazi flag. It makes sense for you to produce a propaganda piece about Nazis in World War II using Nazi colors, but you're doing so meaningfully and it serves a purpose. And that's what I'm looking for here, not just a pencil scratching and a whole bunch of white and gray. So the time frame. Ideally this project is due at the beginning of class, Monday, Tuesday, November 9th, 10th. So some of you guys are a bit ahead, some of you are a bit behind, but that gives you a sense about roughly where you should be when it's time to finish this project. Okay, so the learning targets assessed we've already talked about. We've already talked about the goals, but I want to take a moment and talk about the format. So students will create a piece of visual propaganda. While most students will simply draw it on a sheet of computer paper, there are some acceptable alternatives here, and I encourage students to take advantage of these ideas because this is when this project gets super cool for me as a teacher. You could do something like create a sculpture, right? Propaganda is just visuals. So you could create a sculpture using clay out of paper if you wanted to stack paper, cardboard, wire, or really anything else. But I have had 2 students in 7 years attempt sculptures, and both of them came out very cool. Unfortunately, I don't have pictures of those to show you for the examples, but they're super awesome. Okay? It could be a legal, and I emphasize the word legal here in all caps, piece of street art. And so what I mean by that is maybe you go out and you create a piece of chalk art in somebody's driveway, your driveway, or a public park. And you take a picture of it and you turn in the picture. So you don't just have to be limited to this idea of a piece of paper and some coloring pencils. You could do this totally as like a public street piece of art, which would be super awesome. Please don't go tagging buildings with spray paint and saying my teacher said I could do this, because that's not what I'm saying. All right, this one I do have some examples of that I could show you, and that's cut and pasting multiple pieces or different colors of construction paper together to sort of form one big propaganda piece. You could also create a short film or commercial that may be uploaded to YouTube or turned in by flash drive, or in this case shared over the drive. I haven't really ever had anybody take advantage of that one, but if you're feeling that that's the way you want to go, you could totally do that for this. All right, so here's some success criteria. How do you know that you're being successful at what you produce? Well, in my mind, number one, your propaganda piece has a clear position, and it has a relevant political and social issue to World War II. You're not talking about Black Lives Matter, because that's an issue today, not back then. And it's pretty clear that you're either for or against something, like, yes, I want us to attack Germany. No, I want us to avoid the war. I should be able to look at your poster and tell exactly what your point of view is, and it should be crystal clear. So the second thing on this list, the propaganda piece utilizes a minimum of at least one popularized propaganda style or technique from World War II to express its message. So you can see step 2, or the examples in the video. In this case, what I mean by one popularized propaganda style, I'm talking about appeals to fear, I'm talking about name calling, I'm talking about bandwagon, and I'm talking about use of plain folk. You need to use at least one of those in your poster to get a 3. Okay, the third thing, the propaganda message is expressed by using visual metaphor and an appropriate slogan. And we'll talk about the slogan here in a minute, but the metaphor is basically you have a picture that represents or means something beyond what you've actually drawn. Okay, and then number 4, the role of propaganda in World War II and the historical context of the student's propaganda piece is analyzed and clearly explained by the student. So not only can you draw me a piece of propaganda, but you can explain to me what your message is and how you got it across, right? What is your point of view? What technique did you use? What is the deeper meaning of what you drew? So it's not just that you're analyzing sources here, but you're creating the source and then analyzing it yourself. So here's step 1. As you start this project, this is where you're going to pick it up. So pick your topic and conduct a little research before taking a position and creating your project. So directions. Select one of the topics listed below and research a little bit about it. Decide what position you will take on the issue. You may choose another issue not listed if it applies to World War II and you approve it with me first. Sending me a message, an email, talking to me in class, whatever. Hey, Mr. Polano, I'd like to do this. 9 times out of 10, I will say yes if it relates to World War II. Okay, so once you've made your choice and conducted some research, move on to step 2. Here are the recommendations that I give. And keep in mind that you're trying to convince people of something, so you have to take a position. Let's talk about what those positions might look like here. So first thing is joining or staying out of the war, which is the issue of neutrality, right? Your 2 sort of points of view here are I want the United States to join the war or I want the United States to stay out of the war. You could create a piece of propaganda for either. The second thing is the role of rights of women during World War II. So you may create a poster that encourages women to join the workforce. That is a clear point of view that you're trying to get or convince women to work. Okay. Number 3, use of the atomic bomb. We haven't really talked about the atom bomb yet. We will. But you could either try to convince people to use it against Japan or not to use it. Those are kind of your 2 positions there. Number 4 is civilian defense. So this could deal with rationing or joining the military, right? Uncle Sam wants you. That would be a civilian defense sort of poster. Number 5, supporting or rejecting Japanese internment camps. We will talk about Japanese internment camps later, but if you want to do this as your topic, you're going to need to do a little bit of research. So the two positions or point of views here is yes, I want Japanese internment camps, or no, we should not have Japanese internment camps. And your poster should be clear if that's what you choose on what your position is. Okay. The next one is avenging Pearl Harbor, right? Pearl Harbor happens, Americans are really upset, and perhaps you want to create a piece of propaganda which name calls Japan and says we need to go to war to defend our honor, right? That would be avenging Pearl Harbor. You also have the rights and roles of African Americans or the role rights of Mexican Americans, if you're interested in doing a little bit of research about that and the Second World War, and then creating a poster convincing them to do something, right? We want to convince Mexicans to come to the United States to work in farms. That was the Bracero program during the Second World War. You're trying to convince or attract them to come here to work. And so the last thing I've listed here, and this is perhaps the most important, is that you may select any topic from World War II as long as I approve it, but the one thing that I do not allow is the Holocaust. It's because the images get kind of grotesque, they get kind of disturbing, and in my mind, the Holocaust isn't really U.S. history. It's more European and world history because it doesn't happen here. We at least fight in World War II. The Holocaust is more of a world or European history issue, and so since this is a U.S. history class, I tend to take it off the list for that reason as well. So once you've picked your topic, and these are just my suggestions, you're always welcome to come up with something else, you're going to move on to step 2. And this is where you select at least one propaganda technique or style from the list below, and you must use this in your project some way. These are the exact definitions, basically, that we used in the presentation. And so they're here for you in writing. In case you want to refer to it, you don't have to go back to the presentation to see them. They're all right here. So I like to include those for you. So once you've decided sort of which one you're going to use, you move on to step 3, which is understanding the expectations. So directions. Below is a list of expectations that applies to the creation of your propaganda piece. These elements are how your project will be assessed, that is to say graded, and I'll have you see the rubric provided. Examples are provided in Empower. Again, there are no examples in Empower, they're at the end of this video. All right, so the following are the expectations on your propaganda piece, and these may differ slightly if you choose to do something besides a drawing. Right? If you choose to do a sculpture or a legal piece of street art, these expectations might change just a little bit, but I'll be flexible if you are. Okay? So the first thing that your propaganda piece must absolutely have is a message or point of view. So your propaganda piece should have a crystal clear message and point of view about your selected topic. I should be able to look at your poster and tell, hey, this student wants to convince me that we should use the atomic bomb against Japan. Or this student believes that Japanese internment camps are bad and we should get rid of them. Right? I should be able to look at your poster and tell in about 2 seconds what your point of view is. So the next thing is the types of propaganda. We just discussed this. Your piece of propaganda must use at least one style or technique that was listed above in step 2. All right, here's the slogan. And if you're doing a drawing, you are required to have a slogan. Your project must have a short phrase or slogan that helps get your message of your propaganda piece across. So here's some examples. Loose lips sink ships. It's a short little slogan. It's catchy. It lets people know, hey, if you have loose lips, meaning you talk a lot, you're going to sink ships because the enemy is going to overhear you. Right? You never know who is a spy. So if you're constantly talking to your neighbor about, hey, I saw these troops moving and heading out and they're going here, and your neighbor is a spy, your loose lips literally killed soldiers and sunk ships. Another one here is from another famous piece of World War II propaganda, which is when you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. And the message of this propaganda piece was to get people to conserve gas. So basically, if you ride alone, you are riding with Hitler because you're helping the enemy. You're wasting gas that soldiers could use to fight World War II. And so gas rationing, right, not using a lot of gas, was a thing back then. So this idea of, that's your slogan, and it helps you understand the message or point of view. When you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. Right? You need to come up with some sort of slogan that helps get your message across. And again, I'll show you some student examples so you can see what those look like. Next up is relevance. Your propaganda piece must relate and express a message about World War II. You can't just randomly draw something and turn it in and say, oh, I did a piece of propaganda. You have to relate it specifically to World War II, but there is some freedom in how you can do that. This next one is also key, which is originality. The propaganda piece should be created by you, not a copy of something that already exists on the internet or in a history book. Basically, I don't want you to Google propaganda pieces, draw one that exists, color it in, and turn it in and call it your work. That is not your work. That is somebody else's work. I am requiring you to create something original and creative here that gets a message across about World War II, but that falls on you guys. All right, next up we have color, and we talked about this briefly earlier. Your propaganda piece should be meaningfully colored, meaning that flags are colored the right colors. Pencil gray and white paper does not meet the demand of this learning target and results in a 2.0. Right? This learning target is partially about art and how art shapes our culture. I'm not going to say that pencil sketches aren't art, but it's not the same kind of thing as a political cartoon or something that's in color, because color often has meaning or symbolism. And so I think that that's critical for this. All right, so step 4, upload a clear picture of your propaganda project into Empower and complete the response sheet that's posted in Empower. This is where you explain the purpose of propaganda and how your project shapes the way that people think. If you just turn in your picture, you're going to get a 2.0. It doesn't matter if you have the best sort of picture or drawing in the world. If you don't complete this step, which is where you explain your picture, 2.0 because it's incomplete. So please be aware of that, and we're going to take a look at that here in a minute and what you need to do. So this is where you analyze your own source. Just creating the source without explaining it fails to meet the demands of the learning target. So directions. Open the response sheet linked in Empower, answer the following questions in the space provided, and turn the completed response in via your locker. Here are the 4 things you're asked to sort of do. Explain the purpose of propaganda, right? Why does propaganda exist? And I would hope that we've talked about that through the course of this presentation. Second, analyze how propaganda shaped World War II. So analyze the role that propaganda played in World War II. Explain the message and point of view of your project. What are you trying to get across, and what is your point of view about that thing? And then analyze how you got your message across. How did you represent your message? Explain sort of your metaphor or what you drew, how it helps you get that message across, and then explain what propaganda technique you used and how it appears. So, for example, if you're using appeals to fear, explain how you made the viewer with your propaganda piece afraid of something. What did you make them afraid of, and why did you make them afraid of it? Okay? I want to take a break here, and we're going to go on ahead and take a look at this sheet. So this is linked in Empower. And this is the written portion of this assignment, right? You do your drawing, you take a picture of it. Here's the other thing you need to turn in. And so you can see that literally these questions are what we just discussed, and there's space here for you to just type your answer. So however long it is, however short, whatever, right? So that first question, explain the purpose of propaganda, explain how propaganda shaped World War II, explain the message or point of view of your project, and analyze how you got your message across. Okay, and you'll notice here that there are nothing for a 3, 5, or a 4, so everybody's required to answer all of these 4 questions. Okay? Basically, when you're done with this, you just finish it, turn it in through your locker, and this is the other half of your assignment, right? You have your drawing or your piece of art, and you have your explanation, which is right here. Okay? So I'm going to go on ahead and move down here, and here's how this project is graded. Okay? And you can see that these are the elements that are listed. So if we go back up here really quick, don't want to move too fast because it freezes. In step 3, these are the 6 things you're asked to do over the course of your project. Here is what those things look like as a 2, 3, and 4. So for instance, message or point of view, right? For a 2, student's propaganda piece does not express or represent a clear point of view. For a 3, student's propaganda piece expresses and represents a clear point of view. So the difference between a 2 and a 3 is here it's clear, there it's not. Here's what a 4 looks like. In addition to the criteria under proficient, students' propaganda correctly expresses and shows 2 perspectives of a single issue in a way that does not confuse the message. This is extremely difficult. It's why it's a 4.0. So you can see that each of those items that was listed has what a 2, 3, and 4 looks like. Now, when we talk about slogan and relevance, you either have a 2 or 3 because it's either relevant or it's not. There's no real way to give you a 4 there. Same with a slogan. You either have a slogan or you don't. And so there's no real way to give you a 4 for that either. Okay, so here are the learning targets. And this is really the part that I use to determine what your overall score in the project is. Right, so for analyze a variety of historical sources, data qualitative and quantitative in nature, to get a 3, Students' propaganda piece must successfully recreate a historical source with a message that is relevant to World War II. So if you do that, that's a 3. Here's the next part here. Analyze a variety of historical sources and data qualitative and quantitative nature. These are 2 things for the same learning target. So the second thing is that student is able to clearly evaluate and sort of explain what elements or things you did to convey your message. So basically, here is you can create a source, here is you can explain the source. And in doing so, you basically analyze historical sources. Okay. Here's the next learning target here. Describe and analyze the historical development and impact of the arts and literature on culture of the United States. In order to get a 3 here, student is able to clearly analyze the role of propaganda in World War II. You can tell me this is why it was important, what it did, where it fit, its relationship to World War II, and I'm saying that you're mostly good on that target. And this is the same target, and for a 3 down here, student is clearly able to analyze the role their propaganda piece would have played in World War II. So you can tell me, I created this piece of art, and this is what role it would play. Okay? And so that's really, these things more than anything must be true in order for you to get the 3 on the assignment. Okay? You can see that that's where this ends, and so we've gone through everything you need to do. Right? Pick your topic, do a little research, pick a propaganda style, create your propaganda, fill out and explain your piece of propaganda, and then basically grade yourself. Make sure that you're good. The last thing I want to do before we depart ways here is I think it's important that we, let's see here, take a look at some examples. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and kick this up here. Oh, I should not have done that. Now I have to find it again. Sorry, guys. We'll take a look at some samples here, and these really range back to my first year teaching, because that's truly how long I've been doing this assignment. So the following slides contain pictures of previous student work ranging back up to 7 years. All of these samples, except one, got at least a 3.0. Some got 3.5s and other 4.0s. One of them did get a 2, and I'll explain to you why it got a 2, because I want you to be aware of that. All of these are in some way creative, but meet the demands of the assignment. We'll discuss why, I said it got a 2, it actually got a 1. We'll discuss why that 1 got a 1. So here's the first example that I have for you, and this is from my very first year. Right, this student is now an adult and like 23 or 24 years old, and I still have their poster. This student actually drew these circles and letters, or they printed out the letters, they cut them out and put it on a different sheet of paper. And so you get this issue where the sort of other paper and letters give it a sense of depth that you don't get that if you just write it out on your own. And so in this case, this was Captain America, right? Captain America helps the government. You should too buy victory bonds. And if you've seen the very first Captain America film, there's actually a scene in that film where he's trying to sell victory bonds, convince Americans to buy them. Okay. So here's the second one. This poster is about Japanese internment, and the student is trying to convince you that Japanese internment is a good thing and that we should do it. So you can see here they have a slogan, good for us, good for them. So Japanese internment camps, this is a positive thing from the student's point of view, right? They're good for us as Americans, and it's good for them as Japanese. And they go on to explain, keep families together, prevent future disasters, report all Japs. Right? And Jap is, of course, a racist term from World War II for Japanese people. So in this poster, you can see Pearl Harbor happening, which is sort of what the Japanese did to us. And so this is the idea of keeping families together to prevent future disasters. Like, we don't want another Pearl Harbor. And so in order to protect ourselves and protect the Japanese, what they're trying to convince you to do here is report all Japanese people so that they can be sent off to the camps, which is what you see over there on the right-hand side with the barbed wire. Okay. Here's another example. This one I thought was kind of clever and funny, right? This is not the greatest art in the world, but it's pretty funny. So I like this one actually a lot. The slogan down there is join the war or learn to speak German. Because the idea is if you don't join the war, we might lose. And instead of speaking English, we'll start speaking German because we'll be taken over by Nazi Germany. And so you can see here that they've drawn Hitler, and he's basically like speaking German at Uncle Sam, who's forced to do hard labor. And the American flag has become basically part Nazi. So this is kind of a clever way to get this idea of, hey, you need to join the war in order to be successful. And so what I would argue here is this is largely an appeal to fear, right? You don't want to lose, you don't want to speak German, then you should join the war. Okay, this one is where we start to get into some more of the abstract ones that are kind of fun. And this is where you guys get an enormous amount of freedom. You can see that this student has taken sort of a classic pop culture reference and turned it into a World War II relevant message. And that's the key here. You can really draw whatever you want. The catch is you have to make it about World War II. And so you can see here, this is representative of the Japanese flag. This is representative of the American flag. And so you can see that this is about the United States fighting Japan. That is relevant to World War II. You can also see cleverly that there's a mushroom cloud in the background, which is representative of nuclear bombs, which is also like a mushroom from Mario. It's actually pretty clever. And you can see that at the top, we have a very different slogan, right? The slogan is, when you drop a bomb, you drop your moral standards. And so this student is trying to convince you not to use the atomic bomb, because when you do, it makes you a bad person. So they have this visual metaphor, they have this slogan that helps get their message across. Okay. Next up, we have another clever one. And in this case, the letters are actually stickers. They actually found sticker letters and did the different colors. It looks beautiful. And then they did this clever pop culture drawing about Tom and Jerry. And so you can see that Tom, because of his armband, is representative of Nazi Germany, and he has himself a little Hitler mustache. And he has Jerry, who represents England, who, by the way, during the Second World War, Nazi Germany was like crushing and threatening England, right? And he's holding the English flag, so that's how we know what Jerry represents. He's basically about to be eaten, and here comes America, the strong bulldog, to beat up Nazi Germany and protect England, which the message, right, the slogan matches that. Everyone's doing it. Join the war, protect your friends. In this case, they're saying that the United States needs to protect England, who is our friend, right? And I think that this is largely a bandwagon, this idea of, hey, everyone's doing it, so you should join the fight too. And again, this is a very clever pop culture reference, Tom and Jerry, but they make it about World War II with the flags, the colors, the symbolism, and it changes the meaning of the message. And so something like this would get at least a 3, if not a 3.5. Okay. So here's another one, kind of a popular one done over the years for Perry the Platypus and Dr. Doofenshmirtz. Know your place, shut your face. And so it's the idea that, you know, don't talk about things that you know because spies could be listening. So, you know, shut your face, don't say anything. And so here you can see that they have made this about World War II because they've drawn the American flag and they've drawn the swastika. And so this changes the meaning or the context of the message. Okay. Here's one from last year that is super cool. And I struggle to figure out what some of this stuff means myself. But save your citizens, stop these monsters. Join the military before the enemy wins the war. And so I think this is clever because they're showing this as an hourglass, right? And when you flip over an hourglass, the sand starts to spill from one side to the other. And when the sand is gone, the time is up or you're out of time. And so the idea is you need to join quickly or else we are going to run out of time. You can see at the top, there's sort of the Nazis' land where the Nazis are coming in. You have sort of the death skull that represents Nazism and how that is pressing down or going to burn the United States and our citizens if we don't step in and stop it. It's a super clever, well thought out and artistic piece of art with exceptional coloring. This is what I would give a 4 to, because the concept of the hourglass and how you need to join now before time runs out is such a cool metaphor. This one definitely earned the 4.0 from me. All right, here's one from, I believe it's Fallout. You'll have to forgive me, I'm older than you youngins, and sometimes I forget what's cool and what's not. So this is Victory is Our Tradition, and this is the kid from Fallout. And, you know, it's let's finish this, let's drop the nuke, totally about World War II, sends the message that, hey, we need to drop the atomic bomb in order to finish the war. And so you can see that their slogan, tradition is our victory, let's finish it, gets that message across. Okay. And this is another one of my favorites. This is, I believe, also from last year. And I think that this is so clever, what this student did. You know, when it came out, students were obsessed with it, and so I, of course, encourage students to draw whatever they want, as long as they make it about World War II. And so you can see here that, you know, Pennywise the Clown, has taken on the persona of Hitler with the mustache and the swastika band, and he's got his sort of swastika soldiers there with him, right? Nazi Germans. And the Losers Club represents the different countries that fought against Nazi Germany. And so rather than drawing their faces, they simply drew the flag. And if I'm not mistaken, the student actually picked each person in the Losers Club to represent a different country for a specific reason. I don't know why they did. I wish that I did, but I know that they were very intentional in picking who was what country. And so you can see that their slogan is down here at the bottom in sort of the pool of blood. The only thing to fear is fear itself, which is really clever because, one, that is a quote from a speech of FDR from the Second World War, and two, it deals with the concept of fear and Pennywise. And so again, this is an appealing to fear, right? Don't be afraid of your enemy. Your enemy is sort of imaginary and only gets power if you fear them. It's a very cool piece of art. And I believe this is the last one. We'll double check here in a second. This is from last year as well, and this is just super cool because this is when, again, a student took sort of different colors of paper and made it three-dimensional, right? And they sort of made Godzilla or the monster that's attacking the city, and you can see that they've used these little pins for the legs and arm so that they're movable and like he can walk and move his arm. It's super cool. And sort of the little flames on the buildings actually stick out. It's just a clever way to use materials that you have laying around, but this is on a very cool level, kind of above a lot of the other ones in terms of cleverness. And so you can see that they have their slogan up here. After the bomb, they'll be gone. Stop the threat. So the idea here is that Japan is Godzilla, because if you know the history of Godzilla, he comes from Japan. And so we need to drop the bombs so that they're gone, so that there's no chance that they could ever attack or destroy us, right? If we want to stop the threat, this sort of Japanese Godzilla threat, then we must use the atomic bomb to do so. Right? Oh, looks like we have one more. I forgot about this one. This is the one that got the 1, right? I said that one student project got a score of 1.0. This is it. And it says, award for careless talk, don't discuss troop movement, ship sailings, or war equipment. Super cool poster. Super cool. One of the ways that you can get a 4.0 is create a poster that I could look at and believe is from World War II. Right? I look at it and I'm like, that's a super World War II style. It's the same kind of art style, the same kind of messaging. Like, and that's what I initially saw with this poster. But upon further research, hey, look at that. They basically copied it from the internet. They added a burning flag in the background, but that doesn't really make it theirs. You know, they added something that is not super significant to the message. It doesn't help get the message across in any way or change the message. It's basically just adding something to say that you added something. And you can see that the slogan is not theirs. There at the bottom, it's word for word the same. And so I gave the student a 1.0 because they basically cheated. It's not their work. This is a real poster from World War II. And, you know, it's not your work. I don't give credit for work that's not yours. And so while I encourage you to be creative and pick something that you're interested in, whether it be an anime, a movie, a book, a cartoon, and draw a scene from that and make it about World War II, somehow change the context of it, you know, something like this just is not going to cut it, right? It's basically an automatic fail, and you have to go back and redo it. So the big takeaways: pick a topic. Make sure that if it's not on the list, that you approve it with me, not the Holocaust, right? I've said that again. Make sure that you use intentional color, which all of these examples that I showed you did. And you can see where here, this example doesn't use a whole lot of color, but it uses red, white, blue, black, and white very intentionally. And that's all you need. I'm not looking for a masterpiece here, but color helps with your message. And I think that it's essential, and so I require it. Please take away that you must do the written part at the end of the assignment, located in Empower, to get the full score. Right? Without that, you're just going to get a 2 because you've created the source, but you haven't explained the source. And that's where you earn that full credit. Okay? Well, this is where we come to an end, and believe it or not, because this assignment counts for historical expressions, there's only going to be 2 assignments in the next playlist because this one here is the 3rd. This basically counts as the 3rd for historical sources, the other one being the cartoons from the Industrial Revolution and Progressive Era. That was the other historical sources target, so there's a total of 3. right? Spanish-American War, this one, and the one that I just talked about, the political cartoons from the Industrial Revolution. And then this will be the third item for historical expressions. So I look forward to seeing you next class, rather next lesson, for the 11th assignment, which will deal with art and culture of the United States. Thank you.